Being a parent is arguably the hardest job on the planet. You spend 18 years losing sleep, spending money, and pouring your heart into a tiny human being, all with one specific goal in mind: to raise a functional, independent adult who can survive in the real world without you. You dream of that moment when they toss their graduation cap in the air. You visualize the empty nest, the quiet house, and the pride of watching them launch into their own life. But what happens when the launch fails? What happens when, instead of flying the coop, your 18-year-old looks you in the eye and says, "I'm not going to college. I'm not getting a job. I'm taking a gap year. Oh, and by the way, I still expect my weekly allowance." This isn't a hypothetical nightmare. This is the reality for a parent named Madison, who recently shared her dilemma with the world. Her 18-year-old son wants to take a year off to find himself, which sounds noble enough until you hear the fine print. He insists that his parents continue to pay him his allowance of $150 a week. That is $600 a month. That is nearly $8,000 a year. To do nothing. This story has set the internet on fire, sparking a massive debate about entitlement, parenting styles, and the fine line between supporting your children and crippling them. Today, we are going deep into this controversy. We are going to look at the mathematics of this audacity, the savage reaction from the public, and the psychological trap of the participation trophy generation. Let's start by breaking down the request itself, because the numbers tell a fascinating story about perception versus reality. $150 a week to a working adult with a mortgage, utility bills, and car payments. That might not sound like a fortune, but let's look at it through the lens of a teenager with zero expenses. If this kid is living at home for free, eating food from his parents' fridge, using their electricity, and burning their Wi-Fi, that $150 is pure, disposable income. To put that in perspective, in many states, a minimum wage worker would have to stand on their feet, dealing with angry customers and scrubbing floors, for about 20 hours a week after taxes just to clear that amount. T's 18-year-old is demanding the equivalent of a part-time job salary without clocking in for a single minute. He calls it a gap year. But let's be honest about what that term has morphed into. Traditionally, a gap year was a time for high achievers to take a breath between a rigorous high school career and an intense university schedule. It was often spent backpacking through Europe on a shoestring budget, building houses in South America, or working odd jobs to save money for tuition. It was about gaining grit. It was about seeing the world. However, in this context, without a job and dependent on an allowance, a gap year is just a fancy euphemism for unemployment. It is a paid vacation. It is a sabbatical from a career that hasn't even started yet. The mother, Madison, admits she feels frustrated and uncertain. She's trying to be a modern, supportive parent. She wants to foster a healthy relationship. But deep down, her gut is telling her what every single person in the comment section is screaming: "Teasy's a trap." The reaction from the public has been brutal and, frankly, hilarious. When you present a scenario like this to the court of public opinion, you are going to get a verdict. And in this case, the jury is not hung. They are furious. One commenter, Bob Ruth, hit the nail on the head with a comment that resonated with thousands of people. He wrote, "And $150 at that. I guarantee the kid has a room full of participation trophies." This comment cuts deep because it addresses the root cause. We are looking at a generation that has been raised to believe that showing up is enough to warrant a reward. If you got a trophy just for playing soccer, even if you lost every game, why wouldn't you expect an allowance just for existing, even if you aren't contributing? It is a logical progression of a parenting style that protects children from failure and discomfort. Another commenter, Marty Cohn, offered a much more direct solution, saying, "The rent is due. Your Samsonite luggage is by the door." It sounds harsh. It sounds like the tough love of a bygone era. But is it wrong? The internet doesn't think so. There is a prevailing sentiment that comfort is the enemy of growth. If the bird's nest is too comfortable, if it has cable TV, a stocked fridge, laundry service, and a weekly paycheck, why? Would the bird ever fly? Why would the bird even bother to flap its wings? Then there are the comparisons to what other 18-year-olds are doing. A user named Scott Derry commented, 18 years old, I enlisted with the army. Think about the contrast. On one side, you have an 18-year-old signing a contract to defend their country, waking up at 4 in the morning, enduring boot camp, and learning discipline. On the other side, you have an 18-year-old negotiating his allowance so he can find himself on the couch. The gap between these two maturities is not just a gap, it is a canyon. But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Why would a parent even consider saying yes to this? It usually comes from a place of love, mixed with a heavy dose of fear. Modern parents are terrified of severing the relationship. They read articles about gentle parenting and keeping the lines of communication open. They worry that if they cut the money off, the child will resent them, or worse, fail out there in the cold, hard world. There is also the fear of the failure to launch. Parents look at the economy, they look at the rising costs of rent, they look at inflation, and they think it's too hard out there. I need to cushion the blow. But by cushioning the blow, they are removing the very thing that builds resilience. Necessity. Necessity is the mother of invention, but it is also the mother of employment. If you don't need to work to eat, you probably won't. Human beings are biologically wired to conserve energy. If resources are provided for free, the drive to hunt and gather evaporates. So, what is the psychology of the allowance at 8? An allowance, by definition, is money given to a child who cannot legally work, usually in exchange for learning how to manage small sums or doing household chores. Once you are 18, you are a legal adult. You can vote. You can go to war. You can sign contracts. You can go to prison. At 18, money from parents should shift from an allowance to either support with conditions or a gift. Calling it an allowance implies a dynamic of a child who is still under authority. But this son wants the freedom of an adult with the financial safety net of a child. He wants to have his cake and eat it too, and he wants his parents to pay for the cake. Let's look at the financial implications for the parents. $600 a month. But a year, that is $7,100. If these parents took that money and invested it in a standard S&P 500 index fund for their own retirement, over 20 years, that could grow into a significant safety net for them. Instead, they are setting it on fire to subsidize a gap year that has no clear goals. One commenter, Nova, sarcastically wrote, "I want $150 allowance. Adopt me." This highlights how out of touch this request is with the reality of the working class. There are grown adults working 40 hours a week who don't have $600 left over after bills to spend on fun. So, how does a parent handle this without blowing up the family? The article suggests a direct conversation. That is a good start, but the conversation needs to have teeth. It cannot just be about feelings. It has to be about economics. If the son wants to live in the house, tenants pay rent. If he has no money, he pays rent in labor. He paints the house. He does the landscaping. He fixes the roof. Real work, not unloading the dishwasher. If he wants money, he becomes an employee, and employees have performance reviews. If his job is to take a gap year, what are the deliverables? Is he learning a language? Is he volunteering 30 hours a week at a soup kitchen? Is he taking coding classes? If the answer is, "I'm just chilling," then the paycheck should reflect that. Zero work equals zero pay. There is a brilliant strategy mentioned in the comments about matching funds. If the parents really want to help him, they should say, "We will not give you an allowance. However, for every dollar you earn from a job, we will match it." This changes the incentive structure entirely. Now, if he wants $150 from his parents, he has to go out and earn $150 from the world. It forces him to engage with the economy. It forces him to have a boss, to show up on time, to deal with coworkers, and it doubles his reward for doing so. That is supporting a child. The current proposal is enabling a parasite. We also need to talk about the gap year excuse. In Europe and Australia, gap years are common, but they are almost always funded by the student working. They work for 6 months, save up, and then travel for 6 months. The struggle is part of the journey. A gap year funded entirely by mommy and daddy isn't a journey of self-discovery. It's a journey of self-delusion. You don't find yourself at the bottom of a bag of chips while watching Netflix in your childhood bedroom. You find yourself when you miss a bus in a foreign country. You find yourself when you have to budget your last $20 to last 3 days. you find yourself when you realize that no one is coming to save you. By shielding him from this reality, the parents are robbing him of his own story. They are keeping him as a supporting character in their life, instead of letting him become the protagonist of his own. The comment section is ruthless because they see the long-term damage. A user named Raymond wrote, "Allowance at 80. You are breaking your son." Another waiting to be worthless. It is a harsh word, worthless, but in an economic sense, he is right. If you enter the workforce at 25 with no experience, no grit, and an expectation that money is given rather than earned, you are going to be crushed. The world does not care about your self-esteem. The world pays you for the value you provide. If you have spent your formative years providing zero value, the market will price you accordingly. Let's imagine the alternative timeline. The parents say, "No, we will not pay you. In fact, if you are not in school, you have 30 days to find a job or you need to find a new place to live." It sounds terrifying to a parent. What if he leaves? What if he struggles? He will struggle. That is the point. He might have to live in a crappy apartment with 3 roommates. He might have to eat ramen noodles. He might have to take a job he thinks is beneath him. But in 6 months, he will walk a little taller. He will look at a paycheck and know he earned it. He will understand the value of $1 because he traded his life energy for it. He will respect his parents more because he will realize how hard they worked to provide the life he took for granted. Or he stays on the allowance. And 10 years from now, we are reading another article titled, "My 22-year-old son still lives at home and demands we pay for his internet." The slope is slippery, and it is steep. This story also touches on the concept of privacy and boundaries. The article mentions that if he stays home, the parents need to protect their privacy. This is crucial. If an 18-year-old is living at home like a child, the dynamic is weird. If he is living there like a tenant, the dynamic is professional. But you cannot have it both ways. He cannot demand the privacy of an adult no curfew. Guests whenever he wants, while demanding the subsidy of a child allowance, free rent. Privilege and responsibility are a package deal. You don't get one without the other. To the parents watching this who might be in a similar boat, it is okay to close the wallet. It is okay to be the bad guy. In fact, being the bad guy now is the only way to be the hero later. Your job isn't to be his friend. Your job is to be his parent. And sometimes, parenting means pushing the bird out of the nest and watching them fall for a few seconds before they figure out how to fly. The internet has spoken. And for once, the internet is making a lot of sense. The consensus is clear. The allowance stops today. The gap year can happen, but it happens on his dime. It's time to trade the participation trophy for a punch card. It's time to trade the allowance for a paycheck. And it's time to trade the comfort of childhood for the adventure of adulthood. Because if you don't, you aren't raising a man. You are raising a dependent. And the only thing worse than an empty nest is a nest that never empties, because the baby bird is too fat to fly. So, I turn the question to you. Imagine you are these parents. Your son looks you in the eye and asks for $600 a month to find himself. Do you write the check? Do you negotiate? Or do you point to the front door? The choice you make doesn't just affect his bank account. It defines his character for the rest of his life. Choose wisely.